Hello everyone. I will now be talking about the pedagogical requirements for the IPSIT model that we have just discussed. Let me just share my screen. So I hope you can see my presentation. I will just put it on full screen. So let's look at the various pedagogical requirements that are there for the IPSIT model. I'll be talking about three components, that is the teaching learning component, the assessment and evaluation component, and that of effective feedback. Starting with the first one, teaching learning component, we've already discussed in our last presentation that any form of blended learning requires a fair amount of planning before and during the execution. And the same is true for the IPSIT model as well. So innovative teaching learning activities need to be planned for the various interactive sessions that we are going to have, the synchronous as well as the asynchronous activities that we are going to be having with our students. And it needs to be planned in a way that there is as much as possible active participation of the learners. Since we've already spoken about it, since the learning goals are collaboratively made, the student as well as the instructor, both of them are very clear as to what exactly the student wants to get out of this learning process. So the activities also need to be formulated in a way that the students are able to reach that particular academic goal that they have decided for themselves. So for that purpose, we need to have at least 30% face-to-face instruction interaction with the instructor, and at the maximum online instruction needs to be of 70%. So like we had said earlier also, blended learning is a combination of face-to-face and online mode of instruction. So between 50 to 70% online instruction and between 30 to 50% face-to-face instruction is what is a ideal combination for blended learning. For any form of blended learning to take place, since we need online instruction as well, any institute offering blended learning will need to have the infrastructure in place. That is, there has to be Wi-Fi availability, there has to be LMS availability. So without that, online instruction is not going to be possible. It's going to be very difficult otherwise. And also thinking that, okay, now everything is going to be online, so we don't need classrooms and we don't need buildings, that also is not going to work, because we need to have face-to-face interactions as well. When we are planning any activity, we already discussed that both synchronous and asynchronous activities need to be there. A minimum of 30% of synchronous time needs to be there. That is the activities which are planned with the instructor being present with the students in real time, whether it is online or offline. And the synchronous sessions should not be just lectures. They need to be some material which you have given to them as an asynchronous activity, so like some video or some paper which you would like to discuss with the students. You have given them some material that they need to go through. So when you are with the students, you would be answering their queries, finding problems that they are facing and trying to resolve those, giving demonstrations, real life practical experiences for the students. The students can give their presentations of whatever they have learned, whatever they have done. That all those are the different type of learning than the kind of teaching learning that we are used to so far. The virtual class should not be more than 50% of the total synchronous time. That is like what I was already saying, that lecture mode of interaction needs to be kept to the minimum possible. The greater focus should be on practical applications and also assessing whether the students have been able to understand and comprehend and assimilate the concepts that we are trying to explain and imbibe. The asynchronous work is equally important, because in fact asynchronous work is required before the synchronous time is spent. So you've already given some work to the students which they have gone through, which you are going to be discussing when you meet them in real time. And as far as possible, it needs to be avoided that the student is spending passive time in learning. That is, you give them material and they just go through it. That kind of activity should be not more than 50% of the time. So maybe you could give them a link which they can explore. Maybe you could give them a title of an area or a concept which they need to explore. Maybe you could give them some broad area for which they can do some review of literature, which they need to go on online to look at other people who have done the various studies in that area, design their projects, do some kind of presentations when you have the synchronous time. So passive accessing of e-resources should be as less as possible. The face-to-face time should also involve learner-centered activities in which the students are more actively involved in the learning process. As we've said already, that the entire learning process is collaborative. So the activities that are planned also should be collaborative in nature. And the LMS can be used to the maximum by posting instructions on the LMS, by giving them the quiz and the tests, or the other assignments on the LMS. So the biggest advantage of this is that when the students are posting their assignments onto the LMS and you give the feedback, it stays as a record on the LMS about that student, so that at the end, the formative assessments that you have done during the semester are also available to you and to the student at the end of the semester, to be able to see what is the learning that has taken place for the student through the semester. So taking up from there itself, the assessment and evaluation is a very important component of any learning. As teachers, we know assessment and evaluation is a very important component, and it plays an even more bigger role as far as blended learning is concerned, because of the structure of blended learning. So since we are saying that each person has his own academic goal, each person has his own academic or a learning path, then is the person reaching that goal? Is the path that we have decided collaboratively the right path for him to reach that goal? How would we know that? We would know through the assessment and evaluation that we will be doing consistently and constantly throughout. What I had already discussed, that we're talking in terms of the formative assessment, that is through quiz, through discussions, through queries, through MCQs, through assignments. So these are what will tell us, both of us, that is the learner as well as the instructor, whether the academic goal is being reached or not. So the both formative and summative assessments are required. Formative during the entire learning process, and summative at the end. Either it can be in the form of a test at the end of a unit that you have completed, or it can be at the end of the semester. That is what the person has learned throughout the semester. So the assessment is not only essential for the student, and for the it is also essential for the teacher, whether the progress is the way. For example, if supposing I give a quiz and I find that most of the students have only gotten 3, 4, 5 in that quiz, that also gives me an understanding that probably I have not been able to put across the concept in greater, I need to do it with greater clarity, because the students, most of the students have not understood the concept. They have all scored less than average marks in that particular quiz. So the assessment is giving me an idea not only about the students' progress, but also whether I am able to make an impact on the students as far as being a teacher or an instructor or a guide or a mentor is concerned. So it is important, the assessment is important not only for the student but also for the instructor. And formative assessment is very, very essential, because it also gives me an idea that probably I need to change the way I am giving the information for the students to be able to understand it more comprehensively. So these are the different formative and summative methods of assessment: quiz, observation, creating Venn diagrams and other charts, classwork, homework. All these are ways of formative assessment. And you have the various exams, end of unit test, end of term exam. All these are the summative assessments. And like I said earlier also, that the way we give the feedback to the student also is very important, because it needs to finally serve the purpose of motivating the student to learn further, rather than demotivating the student by telling the student that he or she is wrong in or is a failure as far as the learning process is concerned. So, what are the ways in which assessment can enhance motivation? When we emphasize on the progress and achievement rather than on the failure aspect of the student. When the feedback is given for the with the sole purpose of pushing the person to learn further, to learn more about that particular concept, rather than feeling that this is beyond me and I can't do any more. When we allow the student to feel that he or she has the control and the responsibility in the learning process, their own learning depends on themselves, that is when the feedback or the assessment is of a motivational value to the student. And when it is also the role of the mentor to help the student to feel confident about their abilities, that yes, I can do it, rather than feeling that no, it is beyond me, I am not capable of doing more than this. And the feedback acts as a scaffolding to help the student learn further, improve, gain greater knowledge, learn how to apply that knowledge. So all these aspects are very, very important in the learning process. And as a mentor and a guide, it is important that I use assessment as a motivation rather than as a demotivating factor. The important questions that we need to ask when we are giving the feedback to the person, giving after the assessment that we have done: what is it that we want the learner to learn? What is the learner's goal? What is the academic achievement that the learner wants to reach? Then how is our learner doing? Is he or she able to reach that goal? Is the path that we have worked out appropriate to reach that goal? How do we use this data that we are getting through this assessment process in order to improve my own teaching process and the students' learning methods? How what is the impact that my teaching, my learning, my teaching method is making on the learners? And how do I document all the assessments that I am doing? Because like we already mentioned, assessment is not just in terms of quizzes or in terms of MCQs, it is also in terms of observation as far as the students' responses are concerned. So how do I document all that to ensure that the student reaches their academic goals? So all these are very important questions that I need to answer when I am formulating any form of assessment for my students. So these are the learner-centered principles when we are talking of blended learning and the teaching learning process, as well as the evaluation or the assessment process. So you start with letting the learner construct their own plans, their own goals, their own academic paths. Then you help them to uh, become learners to the extent of becoming experts in the application of those concepts. You try to bring, you give that atmosphere in the class for the students to be able to express the various perspectives or the various points of view that they have, keeping in mind that it is not necessary that what I think or what I see or what I perceive is the only right way of looking at things. There can be multiple ways of looking at the same aspect. The activities that are planned should be as close to real life as possible, so that the students are able to associate, are able to comprehend what we are trying to impart to them. Like when we are saying that you encourage multiple perspectives, we encourage the students to think, not just feed them information. That is the reason why we had also talked about passive access of e-resources should be limited, because the attempt over here is to get the students to think, and not only just think simply thinking process, but also think like an expert, think like even understand their own thinking process. So we need to bring the students to that level. Higher order thinking processes is what we need to encourage in our students. So there are basically, if we look at the assessment, there are three types of assessments. There is assessment for learning, assessment as learning, and assessment of learning. So what do these three aspects mean? So when we talk of assessment for learning, it is that the information that we get as teachers, that whether we are able to impart the information in a way that the student is able to understand. That we need to understand that each student is different, each student has a different way of learning. As teachers, I think we already know that there are visual learners and there are auditory learners, and we also know that when we combine as many sense organs as possible in the learning process, the learning is the best. So we need to understand that each learner learns in a different way, and try to expose the students to as many different ways of learning as possible, so that the students can learn in their own idiosyncratic manner. The assessment is not only to gain insight into what the person is learned, but also whether the student is able to apply what they have learned, whether they are able to understand its application outside the classroom. So these aspects are very, very important when we are designing our learning program, and also when we are assessing whether the student has been able to learn what we are trying to teach them. Assessment as learning is basically helping the students to develop metacognition, which is understanding about the learning process. So let us look at this diagram. So this is the metacognitive approach, that is, before, have I done something like this before? What whatever is being taught right now, have I done something similar like this earlier? That what are the different strengths and strategies that I had learned about this particular aspect? What is it that I want to achieve, and how is it that I'm going to achieve that? During the learning process, there is trial and error for all of us. When we are doing anything new, we are bound to make mistakes. But if we are learning through the process, no harm done. Also, the student sees whether this particular way that I have used as far as imbibing information is concerned is really working for me or not. Do I need to change something? so that I am able to meet my goals? Am I meeting my goals? So this is during the learning process. And after the learning process, what is it that worked best for me? What did I do so that I learned the maximum out of this entire experience? Is there anything that I can improve or alter now to enhance my learning or whatever I have learned so far? How do I apply what I have learned to the different tasks? So this is the entire metacognitive approach, and this is what we are trying to encourage in our students through the blended learning process. Assessment of learning is what we all understand as summative learning. That is, at the end of whatever we have done, we have tests that tell us whether we have been able to understand what we were trying to understand in this entire process or not, whether the curriculum outcomes have been achieved or not. So the three types of assessment, that is for learning, as learning, and off learning, all three are an important component as far as assessment is concerned. So the assessment for learning enables the teachers to use the information about the students' knowledge, understanding, and skills. The assessment for learning also helps the teachers to provide feedback to the students about what they have learned and how they can improve. The assessment as learning involves the students in the learning process, where they monitor their own progress, they ask questions, they practice skills, they learn how to apply the information that they have learned. They use self-assessment, and the teacher's feedback also is a useful component as far as assessment of learning is concerned. Then assessment of learning is what we have as the summative assessment at the end of any course. The most important component of blended learning is effective feedback, the what we give to the learner regarding his or her performance. And this learning loop is a very important aspect of the learning loop is assessment and feedback. That is, you start with you agreeing with learning goals, then you adapt the it, like we mentioned, that it is a collaborative effort, so you adapt the teaching to meet those goals, and the student also puts in the best efforts as far as learning is concerned. And then you assess the pupil as far as summative and formative assessments is concerned, and the constant feedback that you give to the student acts as a motivator for the student to learn further. The different aspects that are considered to be important as far as the IPSIT model is concerned is the self-feedback, that is the feedback that the pupil takes from time to time regarding his own performance, regarding his goals, regarding his movement towards that goal. This self-feedback gets reinforced by the peer group feedback, that is the other students who are along with one specific students. So what are the others feeling about their own learning and your learning as being part of that group? And the third aspect is the learning activities or outcomes, which should be given on at least 75% of the learner's work, so that the student also understands his or her level as to where he or she is as far as the academic goals is concerned. The feedback should have these following characteristics. That is, it should be consistent, needs to be specific, that is related exactly to the area, the problem area which you are focusing upon. The feedback needs to be given in a way which is understandable by the person whom you are giving the feedback to. That is, the person is exactly able to understand what is it that I need to improve. And when you are giving a feedback, it is important to remember that different students are at different levels and require different feedback. The feedback needs to be goal oriented. What is the goal of this particular student? Where is the student at present? And what is the feedback that I need to give to the student so the student can move further ahead? The feedback needs to be timely, it needs to be consistently given from time to time, it needs to be totally transparent, and it needs to be something that the student can use effectively. There is no point in giving abstract feedback which the student is not able to bring into action. So the feedback needs to be something that the student can use in order to move forward towards their goal. Besides the face-to-face feedback, there are feedbacks can be given in other ways. It can be given in the form of audio messages or video messages. The work that the student has uploaded on the LMS, you can give in-text comments. You can also the quiz or the MCQs that you have given, the responses are there on the LMS for the student to see. For even if the student wants to see at a later point of time, it is still recorded there in the LMS, and the student can go back to taking that feedback even at a later stage, again and again if it be so needed. Again, the focus I would bring over here is that the purpose of giving the feedback needs to be to motivate the student and not to discourage the student in any way. So with that, we come to the end of this entire model, which has been given to us, a very, very well thought out model, which has been presented by the UGC. It's a combination of the various the models of blended learning, and it has brought together and given us a new model of a blended learning,